In this video, I will see with you why asking an AI to write a fictional case study allows you to better assess your students' learning and knowledge. First, fictional case studies provide a controlled environment that allows me to create specific situations that highlight the skills and knowledge I want to be able to assess. By using AI to generate these case studies, you can ensure that the scenarios are coherent, relevant, and level appropriate for your students. As you will have understood, with this approach, I promote the educational alignment of my evaluation. If you teach, you will certainly remember the difficulty of finding scenarios aligned with your lesson plan. Increased difficulty if you are also looking for a scenario aligned with the learning levels. These fictitious case studies make it possible to standardize the evaluation. By using scenarios with a similar architecture for all students, we will be able to imagine scenarios in which variables can be integrated without influencing the objectives and learning levels. You can then use the same evaluation grid without reducing potential biases linked to the selection of case studies, and you guarantee a fair and objective evaluation for the entire cohort. AI-generated case studies and scenarios also offer greater flexibility in assessment design. You can adjust the documented case parameters, variables, and scenario complexity. These adjustments make it possible to target specific skills, and we can also imagine tailor-made assessment situations based on the individual needs of students. In this context, it will then be much easier to write questions inspired by a case study, questions pedagogically aligned with the full spectrum of the lesson plan and the learning objectives. Now, I will see with you how this approach leads to a paradox. Producing a more authentic evaluation from a scenario or a case study that is not. As we have just seen, the evaluation will also be much more educationally aligned than in classic educational scenarios built around a real situation which can be biased by satellite data or missing or even inadequate information to evaluate what you need for the course. Using this approach, you assess your students' skills in a controlled context where all factors that influence decision-making must be known and understood by the students. Additionally, this approach allows students to focus on applying the concepts and tools taught to develop their critical thinking, rather than spending time researching information about a real company or interpreting data that is sometimes imprecise or not adapted to their skills. In this context, it is not even useful to prohibit students from using generative AI to respond. For what? Its use has become absurd, even dangerous for them. Indeed, let's return to the constraints of educational alignment. This constraint applies to the teacher and in turn to the student, who must produce an assignment also aligned with the content of their course. If the assignment does not highlight the key points of the course, or conversely, uses elements of answers not seen or worse content whose level is not that of the course, then the result of the evaluation will be affected. Finally, let's not forget that the scenario or case study documents a fictitious scenario. This will considerably reduce the performance of generative AI, which can no longer use its knowledge base to respond. They must only rely on the content provided by the teacher with all the interpretation biases that this will cause if they are used by the student to answer. On the other hand, as a teacher, you can use AI to assess your students' work more effectively and objectively. For example, an AI can help you quickly check the internal consistency of arguments presented by students, identify the strengths and weaknesses of their analyses, and provide personalized and constructive feedback. Plus, by using generative AI to assess your students' work, you save time and can focus on more important aspects of teaching, such as writing better-informed feedback to develop loops and make anchoring with new ideas or new approach. A well-known luxury is time. As we have just seen, generative AI can save time, and my experiments lead me to a ratio of at least 3. With generative AI tools, I produce the same deliverable in 3 times less time. For certain projects, it is even more. My goal is not to work 3 times less, but to implement a new distribution of efforts. I can thus facilitate the paradigm shift recommended since the pandemic. To reinforce the new approach to evaluation, the assignment submission can be supplemented by an oral evaluation during which the teacher asks the student questions about their work. The student who uses generative AI inappropriately will then be immediately unmasked because he is unable to answer the teacher's questions. Another possibility available to us is to produce deliverables for which we did not have time until now, self-supporting formative assessments. I am indeed talking about quizzes which can now be taken to the next level with assessments supplemented by tailor-made feedback for each answer option. It is indeed a time-consuming exercise whose priority always came last and, we must admit, often fell by the wayside. If we integrate generative AI into our educational engineering, the production of formative assessment can also be improved. It is then possible to imagine the production of formative evaluations to punctuate the entire learning process, validate the stages of the student's progress, and give the right to failure. A good practice that I recommend, but which I admit requires time. Time now available with the new distribution of efforts enabled by the integration of generative AI.